This week, the Washington Post, well, that might have been last week, Jeff Bezos' paper announced they would not be making an endorsement. It was followed by a number of papers that have formerly endorsed people: LA Times, Des Moines Register, Gannett, which owns 200 papers across the country, including USA Today, the Chicago Tribune, Sun Sentinel, Minnesota Star Tribune, Tampa Bay Times, Omaha. Okay, you get the point. A lot of newspapers that have typically endorsed and endorsed Biden over Trump decided not to endorse this time. The head of school of journalism, media and culture at Cardiff University, a guy named Matt Walsh, not the bearded Matt Walsh who doesn't know what a woman is, said, firstly, this is a moral failure by newspapers, which are failing their audiences by refusing to make clear judgments about candidates. So my question is, do you agree with Mr. Walsh, or do you have a different perspective on the newspaper endorsement issue?
Well, here's Jeff Bezos's op-ed in his very own newspaper, The Washington Post. In the annual public surveys about trust and reputation, journalists and the media have regularly fallen near the very bottom, often just above Congress. Boo-hoo. Learn to code, am I right, guys? But in this year's Gallup poll, we have managed to fall below Congress. That's sad. Our profession is now, it's not his profession.
You deserve it.
Our profession is now the least trusted of all. Something we are doing is clearly not working. And he goes on to say that reality is an undefeated champion. It would be easy to blame others for a long and continuing fall in credibility and therefore decline in impact. But a victim mentality will not help. Complaining is not a strategy. We must work harder to control what we can control to increase our credibility. Sounds like he's calling out some fake news from his own paper. Which is great. Good for him. No, newspapers should not be endorsing candidates. Why would they do that? They're supposed to be purveyors of news. And if you are endorsing a candidate, then I need to go back and look at all of your articles from about the previous candidate, the other candidate, and say, is this through the lens of objectivity? No, it's not. Or is this a real article? Is this really the news? Or are you just trying to sway people? Yeah, good one, Charles.
Good argument. Charles?
Oh, thank you for asking. I do think they should endorse. Well, first of all, back up. I think there's like this complete misunderstanding between an editorial page and the newspaper, sure, which are two separate things. And the newspaper, like for the context of this conversation, yes, the newspaper endorses, but I hate when people are like, aren't they just supposed to report news? The editorial section editorializes. Like they do that. That is what they do. The newspaper, I would not think that the news section should endorse a candidate, which they typically do not. What they do, that is weird and inappropriate. The editorial section, I think definitely should. I think when you remove that from the conversation, when they choose not to endorse, the only things that you have stepping up are groups that are going to benefit from these people getting elected, and they're going to be giving out their endorsements, and that's who the public is going to be turning to solely to lean on them. Do I think anybody picks up the newspaper and makes the definitive choice who they're going to support based on the newspaper endorsement? No. But generally speaking, I think newspaper editorial section should, and then lay out the reasons why, because typically if you don't have that, like say the New York Times decided they weren't going to endorse in the mayor's race, now you're just going to have industry groups that are going to benefit from contracts in the mayor's office endorsing. And
yeah,
they already do that.
Yeah, but you're not going to have any sort of unbiased arbiter there. There's solely
why do you think the New York Times is an unbiased arbiter?
I'm unbiased arbiter in the sense that they're going to endorse not because they're getting any sort of direct payment or something from it, and they're going to give reasons for it. And in the New York mayor's race, yeah, I do think they would be an unbiased arbiter. And in the national election, no, probably not.
Well, the endorsements matter a lot more down ticket, I think. The Austin Chronicle, as an example, has probably a significant impact on the local electorate and who votes. But to the core of the question, I mean, their approval rating has nothing to do with whether or not they endorse. It has to do with all they do is lie. Right? Washington Post doesn't have credibility, not because they endorse or don't endorse. It's because half of their stories are bullshit. So why don't they focus on that? Now, the question of whether or not they should endorse, I'm kind of with Brad on this one. I don't care what a newspaper editorial board thinks should be president or not. Like, they can do that in their private lives. However, there is this little thing called the First Amendment and freedom of the press. So they can do whatever the heck they want. I think it makes them look bad. It creates conditions where it's impossible for them to be unbiased. If they're endorsing a candidate, they're going to cover the story because the editorial board has editorial direction over the newspaper. So if they're endorsing a candidate, they're going to have bias in their reporting on that candidate versus its opponent. So it creates a bias because they're endorsing. So I don't think they should do it because it impacts their news coverage. However, they certainly have a right to do it or not.
Yeah, I don't think they don't have a right. I just think they shouldn't.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Charles disagrees because
I don't see the problem. I don't see the problem.
You don't see a problem with an editorial board endorsing and then setting the editorial direction for the newspaper.
But the editorial board sets the direction for the editorial section of the newspaper. Not of like your regular local reporters.
They have no impact on the coverage?
No, it's like, I mean, listen, it's supposed to be a firewall between the editorial section and the news. Do they obscure that? And I mean, they work in the same building, of course, they obscure it. But the way it's supposed to operate is that the editorial board oversees opinions and editorials. That's solely what they do. And then you have the newspaper section, which operates completely independent of those. And those reporters are responsive to their editors, and then, the CEO and the publisher and all that. But the editorial board is solely supposed to direct the direction of the editorial page and opinion pages. Now, again, it's the real world. They work in the same building. That doesn't mean they're going to go and have coffee chat and encourage somebody to do something differently. I completely accept that that's a reality.
And a problem?
I don't think so. I mean, because you shouldn't be reading a newspaper blindly anyway. You should be reading it with a little bit of skepticism.
You're talking about like the regular American electorate. I mean, I guess this probably happens all over the world. Don't get me wrong. They're going to be reading. One, they're going to be reading. Probably not. Two, if they're reading the newspaper, they're reading it blindly.
That's fine. Unfortunately, a lot of people do that, but that's not what you should do. People look at everything blindly. People look at people's political commercials blindly and say, oh, this person just said they're going to cut taxes. Okay, they're going to cut taxes. So at a certain point, it's up to the citizen to be
Kamala Harris will end price gouging. Do not tell me otherwise. You fucking bigot.
Thanks for bringing up this topic, Michael. Just
because she's not fully, just because she's half Indian, you don't think that she can do things, Charles? You asshole.
I think if the newspapers are going to attempt to restore credibility, which they're not, but they're saying that that's what they're going to do, they should remove politics from the paper entirely, and this would be one of those steps. But they're not going to. So, well,
Jeff Bezos said that he's going to hire more conservative editors at the Washington Post.
Sure, he is.
I mean, sure, he's not going to endorse in 2026 or 2028. I'm sure that, who knows what's going to happen. I'm just telling you what he said he's going to do.
Yeah,
they're going to do that. All the papers are, because they're recognizing that they're losing readers because they're not offering any sort of alternative opinion. And so they're going to, by the market forces, start hiring more conservative writers. They might not be everyone's cup of tea conservative, and they may be spanning all over the spectrum, but they're going to have to if they're going to stay competitive, if they want to get competitive again.
I think it's over for them, but good luck with that, New York Times and Washington.